have noticed that this came a little late. Arrangements for this year's program, or the series of lectures, we came down to the one spot that we left open, which was the lecture after spring break. And the reason we did that was we didn't want to invite someone to come here and have them face a generally empty audience, because a lot of students kind of extend their break. So they said, oh, that's the one you can do, Leonard. Well, we chose them, didn't we? I also have noticed that there are some visitors. We're sorry to be starting a little bit late, but one of the things that we have to do in addition to one of the things we have to do in addition to suffering under scarce resources. So interest when I was studying were political sociology and gender. And also I was very interested in comparative historical methodology. I wrote my dissertation on the Danish rescue. Lee Deide will be here next week to talk to you about that. So I consider myself a sociologist and a Holocaust scholar. And without further ado, I'm going to talk to you about the sociology of genocide. I've provided an outline for you so that you can follow along. I hope not to ramble too much. But when I set out to do this, I realized that there was somewhat of a problem, because there is no unified notion of a sociology of genocide. And what I began to do was go through and try to understand genocide, the scholarship on genocide. To create deterrence led to the creation of a legal definition of genocide. So why did they have to come up with a legal definition of what had gone on? Well, there were three reasons. The first was, and I'm repeating, the task of establishing some way of punishing the perpetrators. You can't punish someone unless there's a crime that's been committed. And the other thing was, in some way, deal with the enormity of what had happened during the Holocaust, to give it a name. And of course, the last was to present and codify the crime so that people wouldn't commit it again. People could say, it's against the law to do that. It's a crime to commit genocide. But who coined the term genocide? I come from a tradition that you can begin to understand the complicated linguistic understandings of the term genocide. As I mentioned, before he died, Lemkin witnessed the passage of the United Nations General Assembly's Genocide Convention, which was the first human rights treaty that the UN passed. I have a little note in my notes here to see, and it's a question to myself. See if it's appropriate to mention that the United States didn't sign this until 1988. Life is filled with irony. I'll discuss a little later why the United States might have been reluctant to do that. The creators of the Genocide Convention understood that there was danger in making the... Hopefully we'll be able to see this if we can. You read it back there? Get it? Everybody get it? Lemkin's definition, as we mentioned, originates from the Greek word genos, or race, or tribe, plus the Latin suffix. Now, I will read this to you. I'm going to make it possible for people to get this. I will send my files to Ilka and Joe, and then if you're not in the class or you would like to have this, you can email me and I'll send it to you. The United Nations Genocide Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which went into force on the 12th of January. Look at this. We know that there were instances of genocide before 1500. There's another genocide that they talk about in their book, and it's the Albigensian Crusades. Does anybody know about that? Aha, another opportunity for you to learn about something you know absolutely nothing about. A-L-B-I-G-I-N-S-I-A-N.
G-E-N-S.
Hmm?
G-E-N-S.
G-E-N-S, right. Joel is my spell checker. Thank you, Joel. I misspelled it here. Those crusades were directed against the Cathars. You don't have gave. Look at that. Much as I would like to present a unified sociology of genocide to you, I cannot do it because none exists, and I mentioned that. What I can do is discuss 3 or 4 aspects of genocide that can be framed within an analysis of the Holocaust. And in this short, it's also a short period of time that we have to do this. Perhaps those few examples will help explain the larger social processes and phenomena involved in the development of the practice of genocide. Jack Newson Porter, a sociologist who is also a survivor, has developed the theory of genocidal processes. See, he has moved from defining injured or suffer. We do not have to make sure that those injuries are taken care of. Then you have a fertile ground for genocide. It is much easier to commit genocide or to turn your back on someone's pain if you do not believe you're obligated. Thank you. I'm starting to wind down, but don't worry. I'm almost done. I'm almost done. So this is a very important concept. Helen Fine found, and I'll mention at the end, a concrete example of how that played out in the Holocaust. Once the victim is labeled by the prevailing propaganda as outside of the universe of obligation, the killing can take place. The technology of death. We've studied about the various acts that were passed by the Germans in prohibiting Jews from working in the civil service, confiscating some of their possessions, confiscating their money. Certainly Jews who wanted to leave had to leave all of their possessions behind. Third, Jews were segregated from the larger populations. Various methods were used. If you have a yellow star, people know that you're outside the universe of moral obligation. You're separated. They were also separated by being sent to the east. If you remember Lucille's book, she and her mother and her sister were sent east to Lodz from their home in Hamburg. Become killers under such circumstances. What group of men cannot? Unquote. You will learn that Reserve Battalion 101 was a group of middle-aged men who were the equivalent of deputy sheriffs who were sent to Poland to commit mass murder by direct shooting of their victims. As a counterpoint to that, next week our lecturer will be Knut Deide. Deide is a Danish rescuer and has officially been honored as a righteous person. His experience during the Holocaust reminds us that it is possible to resist tyranny. It is also an example of how important and effective kindness and simple decency can be under the right circumstances.
I want to know, I think it's called Problem from Hell. Who authored the book?
A Problem from Hell.
Who authored it?
Samantha Howell. Hopefully it'll be out in paperback soon. It's a $30 book. Gene, huh? Any students have?
Nobody else, I do have.
Nobody else but Gene. Okay, Gene.
Okay, you did not mention, at least directly, the concept, the in-group, out-group concept that I think is really the sociological basis for the know, going way back, like go back at least to Constantine and back and forth.
In group out like that. She passed him another note. Follow me when I get off the train. She said I was in a compartment and there were 6 other people. And not one of them, when we stopped at the station, got off and ran into the station and said to the policeman or the German guard, "There's a Jew, there's a Jew." And there's story after story after story about how common that was in Denmark. Now, I know my friend Joel wants me to tell you that the German presence in Denmark was nowhere near what it was like in the other occupied countries of Europe. And the Germans sent middle-aged men to Denmark. They did not have a severe police force. And the Danes were able to live a very happy, successful life for most of the there are some people who would argue that history never repeats itself, that the conditions are always different. It bothered me to no end to hear Saddam Hussein compared to Hitler.
He's much better at what he does.
Did it bother anybody else? Yes. Not so much for the enormity of the crime, but it's so inexact. I mean, they did some pretty awful things there. I mean, that's been...
We've been doing it and doing it and doing it. We just ignore it.
Well, that's the other question that I didn't even bring up. If we identify genocide, are we the world's police?
Yes, we are.
Under what conditions? I don't have an answer to this. It's just a question. There's no other police force. So we have to be the police force. Gene thinks we should be.
Without guilty,
I'm sorry, Gene.